actually really looking forward to your presentation.
I'm sorry, what was that?
I said I'm actually really looking forward to your presentation.
All right. All right. All right. Hello, Sarah. Thank you for joining me tonight.
Hey,
How are you?
Jeff.
How are you?
I am great. Looking forward to the presentation.
All right. Thank you, Sarah. So tonight I'm going to tell you about the elements of the communication strategy for the merger between the Air Force Test and Evaluation Division or Directorate and the Space Force Test and Evaluation Directorate. And just for context, the test and evaluation directorates for both the Air Force and the Space Force have basically been in existence since both of these services began. The Air Force Test and Evaluation Directorate started in 1947 when the Air Force broke off from the Army. And that became the core of the astronaut program itself. So once NASA began in 1958, they pulled their astronaut corps from the test pilots out at Edwards Air Force Base. So then fast forward 75 years to when the Space Force came into existence in December of 2019. Um, the Space Test and Evaluation Directorate started just at the beginning of 2021, and it was headed up by a NASA astronaut, Colonel Nick Hague. He was our first director, and then our second director was also a NASA astronaut with Colonel Mike Hopkins. And now we have a director who is not an astronaut, but he is a test pilot graduate school. So there's a very strong tie between the test pilot schools and the test pilot community between Air Force test pilots and Space Force astronauts. And all that is kind of background, so it's just kind of a full circle. The space program was born out of the Air Force Test Pilot School, and now the astronauts kind of started the Space Task Force, and they have their own school out at Edwards as well. But now, so we are two separate organizations now merging together, and these are organizations with two different cultures, two different ways of doing things. And so we need a communication strategy for this merger to be able to facilitate a, a joint unit for various reasons, which I'll talk about in the briefing. Any questions before I move on?
No, super informative. Thank you. Catch me up.
Good. Okay. Oops. Now it's not. There we go. Okay, so the agenda for this briefing is to present strategic communication goals ahead of this merger, and then review the stakeholders, essentially who do we have to communicate with throughout the merger, to discuss the communication channels that we will utilize, and then the key messaging for the merger and how we're going to measure success. All right, so the goals of the communication strategy, the first one is really to deliver relevant information. There's so many moving parts. So there are within the two directorates, there are 47 personnel across 4 different divisions. There is a front office staff with 2 directors, one for Air Force and one for Space Force, and then the support staff for them. And then there's 3 divisions underneath them. There's 3 in the Air Force and 3 in the Space Force. So those 6 divisions are going to merge into 3. So the first division is the Policy and Manpower Division. They're the ones that help set the regulations and help dictate the authorities to the field as to who's going to provide the test function for each of the services. One is for the Air Force, the other for the Space Force. So that's our plans and programs and policy folks. And then we have the resourcing folks. So essentially, those are the people that put together the advocacy to go to Congress to ask for money for specific programs. So there are the Air Force team, they advocate for programs for assets that that operate within the air domain. So essentially, anything anything above the ground and before space, before the atmosphere ends. That's where the Air Force kind of domain of operation is. And then space is everything beyond the atmosphere of the Earth and into outer space. So the Air Force typically their programs cover basically jets and munitions that operate within the air domain. And then for the space domain, it's typically like satellites and things that get launched into space. So those are two very different domains with two very different sets of challenges. If you think of the harsh environment of launching a jet off of a tarmac and into the sky versus launching a satellite into space from a space launch facility, you need a lot more thrust to get something up into the to escape the atmosphere than you do to just fly from New York to Los Angeles. So those are different assets, different types of conditions, and different missions for each of the service. So we need to just make sure that those assets are well resourced for the defense of the nation. So that's our resourcing team. And then lastly, our infrastructure team and special projects, they're the ones that coordinate with the different ranges to make sure we have all of the facilities in place to be able to test these assets before they become operational within the service. So we need to deliver that relevant information to everyone within the organization as we merge together to be able to continue to do the jobs that we need to do within each division and not skip a beat on the things that we need to do every day. So when we deliver that information, that'll about the merger itself, that will help inform people about their roles within the new organization. So that will help ensure clarity and understanding about how they will fit within the new organization and who they report to and how the reporting structure will go. And then the communication strategy will also help facilitate integration. There are areas where the Air Force and Space Force has already been working together on, but this merger will basically charge everybody to be able to work together and integrate their efforts to support both Air and Space Force. And then lastly, the goal of the communication strategy is to foster morale and trust, because the more information that we deliver, the less uneasy people get about how they fit into the new organization, and we'll be able to just move forward just with that transparency that's necessary to foster that morale and trust. Okay, next is our stakeholders. So who do we need to talk to? So the first two, we need to talk to everyone within the Air Force Test and Evaluation Directorate and the Space Force Test and Evaluation Directorate. So that's the leadership, that's the contractors, that's the military personnel and the civilians, everyone involved in the organization itself need to understand where we are with this new organization, this new merged organization. We also need our leadership to understand what's going on within our unit. So within the Pentagon, we need to let the headquarters Air Force staff understand what's going on with the Test and Evaluation Directorate. But we also need to ensure that the headquarters Space Force staff is involved as well with that communication, because they need to understand that with that merger, the Space Force Test and Evaluation Directorate is moving off of their staff and onto the air staff underneath the direction of the Air Force Test and Evaluation Director. And we'll also need to, within the Pentagon, let the leadership know, and that's the two 4-star generals, the vice chief of the Air Force and the vice chief of space operations, to ensure that they are in line and aligned to, or actually to make sure that we are aligned to their understanding of how these two organizations are going to merge. And then eventually we're going to have to let Congress know that there's going to be one representative to present our advocacy and arguments for funding for the test and evaluation for the whole department of the Air Force, representing equities for both Space Force and Air Force. And then we also need to coordinate with our sister services and ensure that that they know what we are doing here in the Pentagon. And so we have to let the Army and the Navy and the Marine Corps know as well. And then we need to know, or we need to let our external partners, so everybody who's not in the Pentagon on the Air Force side that deal with test and evaluation, we have to communicate with them what's going on. And then we have to communicate that with the Space Force as well. We have 3 field commands in the Space Force. STARCOM, they're the Space Training and Readiness Command. They're the ones that have the operational test authority for the Space Force. So we have to make sure that they understand this merger as well. The IC, that's the intelligence community. So those are 3-letter organizations that deal with intelligence, like the National Reconnaissance Organization, and others that just deal with the intelligence side, to ensure that they understand how the reporting chain goes to get intelligence information from them and to them through our communities. And then lastly, on the acquisition side, we have to ensure that the air acquisitions personnel and the space acquisitions personnel are fully understanding of the merger. Okay, next, communication channels. So this can be communication internally and communication externally. So those formal channels, both internally and externally, we have all-call meetings. So typically that's an internal communication channel to where a commander can bring everybody together in the organization in one room at a time, at the same time, to essentially deliver guidance and directives to a group all at once. And then at a smaller level, the division and team meetings, those are again formal channels to assign tasks and assign teams to be able to work together on specific projects. Then there's written directives such as policies and guidance that spell out not just authorities and directives, but also procedures on how to get things done. So with the merger, we'll have to update some of the policies to be able to reflect what the new organization is going to look like, as well as the new authorities and directives that will be going down into the units that actually do the test and evaluation for the assets that go up into air and space. Official email. This is a good way to communicate from the leadership within the Pentagon to the personnel that work within the Pentagon in order to for example, the director of the Air Force Test and Evaluation, he should be sending out at least monthly emails to let everybody know where we're at with the merger. Another formal channel, Teams calls that you can use on Microsoft Teams, and it's just another way to be able to communicate with our people in a formal setting to set directives for various projects. And then on the informal channels, this is all the chatter that happens outside of the formal channels. And it's probably just as, if not even more important than the formal channels. So these are the phone calls that we have with our coworkers, or our IM Teams chats that we have with our coworkers, or the walks around the Pentagon, or the coffee breaks, or the lunch conversations, or the gatherings and social events outside the building. And then feedback sessions or Q&A sessions on more informal calls. Those are all communication channels that can either align to what's being discussed in the formal channels, or be somewhat subversive to that. So I would just advise that if you're in these informal channels and there are, some issue with how the merger is going, make sure that just it doesn't turn into a gripe session, and make sure that if there is something legitimate that you need to take to leadership, then you can, you can have that conversation with the person in the chain that is most suitable to receive that information. Our teams are pretty accessible, and they are pretty transparent, and they have an open door policy to where if you need to chat with the directors, you can chat with the directors. Each of the division leads have people you can talk to. So that open door policy pretty much exists kind of throughout our two organizations. So I would advise that you avail yourself to those to make sure that those informal channels don't become a bunch of griping about the change, and we can work together to make sure that that we can align ourselves to what the leadership is wanting to do. All right, so key merger messaging. So again, we need to remember that the rationale for this merger was really to help both organizations at once. So with the Space Force being the smallest force of the armed forces for the United States military, we just don't have enough people to do the work we need to do within the building to be able to support space test activities as well as we can. So we are really relying on folks from the Air Force to team with us to be able to help us do the work we need to do to ensure space assets are being tested before they are fully operational and in use. And then on the Air Force side, they actually went through an audit within the Pentagon to determine that they didn't have enough people to justify the space that they were taking up in the Pentagon. So if we didn't merge, the Space Force wouldn't have enough people to support the need for the space assets. And if we didn't do the merger, the Air Force would lose most of their office space because they don't have enough people to justify the space. So this merger is actually a win-win for both of them. So again, going into the merger benefits, it helps both the Air Force and the Space Force with solving some of their problems. But then there's a more equitable share of workload amongst the 47 folks who are going to be part of this merger. And then the integration plan. So I know this is still in work. I understand from our last meeting with the director of the Air Force Test and Evaluation, he was setting a timeline for the initial operational capability and full operational capability. We call that the IOC and FOC. So essentially, the initial operational capability is like a gun going off for a race, and that's when we begin the transition into the one organization, and then the full operational capability is essentially the end of the race for the transition, and we can fully operate in all three of those divisions with the leadership at the helm. And then communication timelines. We just need to establish regular communication timelines to be met with specific emails and specific meetings. So I know Mr. Wilcox, who's the director of Air Force Test and Evaluation, he's already put on the calendar to have the all-call meeting the first week of December. And so we are all expected to attend that. And then once that happens, there will be regular updates either via email or in subsequent meetings throughout the next year. And then the post-merger review, Mr. Wilcox thinks this merger is going to take about 6 to 12 months to occur. So once that is done, there will be a review of how that merger went, and that's really for other organizations. If they have to do the same thing, they can understand the highs and lows for how we went through this merger. Okay, so how do we measure success through this merger and after we have merged together? Are we still meeting Air Force and Space Force goals in test and evaluation? So Mr. Wilcox calls this answering the mail. Are we getting the resources to the test units to be able to test the assets that we need to before they come operational? Are we doing the taskers that come down from headquarters staff? Are we able to advocate for funds effectively from Congress to be able to get dollars towards the test community so that so we can acquire more assets in defense of the nation? So those are the policy goals, the resourcing goals, and the infrastructure goals that each directorate has. So basically, are we meeting those goals? And then even more importantly, how are we developing our personnel? Our test and evaluation team members have a really good history of performing very well, and then being promoted and then selected for choice positions like command positions after test and evaluation. So we have a really good history of that, and as long as we keep turning out better leaders within our respective services, then that's a positive measure of success there. And then collaboration and innovation. Collaboration is just ensuring that we can continue to work together as a team and work together to support those separate goals of Air Force test and evaluation and Space Force test and evaluation, and that that collaboration begins with a solid communication plan. And then innovation. Um, I think it was Elon Musk who said, if if you haven't failed, then you're not innovating fast enough because sometimes you have to be creative, and those things don't work all the time. So but you have to grab onto those things that do work, and just keep your mind going, being curious, being creative with solutions. And even in the Pentagon, where it's very structured and there's a process for everything, there's room for collaboration and innovation in any project that you work through. And as long as we keep those mindsets within test and evaluation, that's a measure of success as well through this merger if we just are able to keep that going. All right, so to review, I went over the strategic communication goals for this merger. I reviewed our stakeholders to ensure who we need to maintain communication with. I discussed the various channels that we can communicate through, and I discussed the key messaging for the merger, and then I talked about the measurements for success. Are there any questions? Oh, you're muted.
I muted for a courtesy. I currently do not have any questions.
All right,
Yeah.
awesome. Well, thank you very much, Sarah, and I hope you have a good evening, and we'll see you next time.
All right. Thank you, Jeff.
All right, and see.
And see.
There we go.
I really thought it was, I really loved how the communication was laid out between formal and informal channels.
Hmm.
And I'm just like, oh my goodness, why do not like more organizations approach it from this perspective?
Hmm.
I'm just like, if all trainings just involved, these are the formal channels, these are the informal channels, this is how we handle these two things.
Yeah,
I thought it was like it was really like opening for me. I was like, oh, I wonder where else I can apply this to. I thought
yeah.
it was like really clear, and I'm sure like maybe that might be commonplace for the knowledge base for your group. Is that pretty much understood?
Um, like it's understood, but it's still like if you get, if somebody gets on a team channel, it's like sometimes it's during a meeting, somebody will say, "This is terrible." Like, they'll just start, they'll start quacking. Have you
Mm-hmm.
got to that part of raving fans yet?
Yes.
Yeah, they're not being eagles, they're being ducks. They're just like quack, quack, quack. So,
Right.
yeah, yeah. But and
But
it's hard to turn that off.
it is. And I like want to apply it, like, I don't know, like predominantly the organization I'm in right now. It's like I've been my most exposure lately has been to the church. And I think even in education, it's like we forget that the water fountain
Hmm.
is informal communication.
Hmm.
Like that is gossip.
Right.
That is like hearsay. That is a lot of other stuff. That is not this formal list of objectives, goals, everything else. This is not formal. Everything else that's going on here is conjecture and feeling and
Hmm.
emotion and off brand sometimes. But like you said, it's like just as valuable. So I
Yeah.
thought that was, I really appreciate you going, you outlining the differences and even the pitfalls of, hey, keep it positive over here. This is not, this is not your
Yeah.
gripe session.
Yeah. Yeah. Good. All right. Anything else?
Yeah, your slides were clear, concise, engaging across the board. So
Yeah.
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 And I think that from coming in with very little, I think the clarity of XYZ, this is what we're doing. I think
Hmm.
it was really fabulous. And I think really calming, honestly. And I really like this is the review at the end. Like this
Hmm.
isn't just going to sit in ambiguity for forever. You really put a nice tidy bow on it as far
Awesome.
as the reevaluation at the end.
Yeah. Thank you. All right. I'm going to stop recording.